This morning, what happened? Seriously, how did Texas Democrats get it so wrong in our state? Dr. Carla Braley, the state party's vice chair, is with us from Houston. Texas remains red, but it is now competitive. We have a Republican and a Democrat with us about lessons learned from last Tuesday and what you should expect to see in 2022 and 2024. And the race to replace Texas House Speaker Dennis Bonnen. We'll look at who might have an edge now, and more importantly, will state lawmakers actually meet at the Capitol, considering the coronavirus?
Inside Texas Politics with Jason Whiteley starts now.
Good Sunday morning to you. What a week. There's a lot of talk out there about the presidential race, as you know, but we are going to spend this half hour here discussing what happened in Texas. First, though, let's get you caught up on the latest political headlines across our state. Democrats appear to be gradually losing support in the Rio Grande Valley. It remains blue there, but Republicans are gaining ground in the southern tip of Texas. Last week, Trump got more than 40% of the vote there. 2 years ago, you'll remember, Beto O'Rourke had trouble there as well. It's an ongoing issue that we're going to take a closer look at in the coming weeks. If you watched our program last week, you saw El Paso Mayor DeMargo. This week, he is fighting for his political career. Mayor Margo finished a distant second among 6 candidates as he ran for re-election last week. The former mayor of El Paso, Oscar Leeser there, he got 42% of the vote. Margo with 25%. Both men meet in a runoff next month. Problems for the Texas Attorney General appear to be deepening. Attorney General Ken Paxton had an extramarital affair with a woman. The Associated Press reports that Paxton then helped that woman get a job with one of his wealthy donors. Paxton's own top officials, 7 of them from his office, accused Paxton of bribery and abuse of office, and that same donor, he is at the center of it all. Let's begin our program now with 2 words. What happened? For months, we've talked here on Inside Texas Politics about how Democrats might turn Texas blue and maybe more importantly, win majority control in the Texas House. But Texas Democrats did neither last week, so they spent the last few days asking the same question that we are right now. How are they so wrong? We're going to pose that question to our first guest this morning. It's Dr. Carla Braley. She is the vice chairwoman of the Texas Democratic Party. She's also an assistant professor of sociology at Texas Southern University in Houston. Dr. Braley, good to see you again.
Same to you. Same to you. Always good to hear you cover the news.
Oh, well, we appreciate that. So you heard my first question. What happened last week? You guys, Democrats had high hopes and couldn't deliver on any of those.
Well, I think we delivered on some, and you'll see across, if you look really closely, you'll see that our urban areas are strong blue now. So we did send a message in those areas. What you also saw is that if you look locally, several candidates who were elected were their first. In Harris County alone, there was basically a complete sweep. If you look at some of the surrounding areas like Stafford, who's having their first black mayor, Texas City has a black mayor. So I think across the state of Texas, we have seen progress. And I think in the upcoming years, you're going to definitely see Texas highly considered as a battleground state. And I think that one could argue that we are certainly not red. If you want to put us in the purple stage, I think you can do that. But we definitely made progress up and down across the state of Texas.
Yeah, I don't think anyone can now argue that Texas is clearly competitive now. But the party and Democrats across the state talked about potentially flipping Texas, that Joe Biden might win this state. There was some discussion about MJ Hagar potentially defeating John Cornyn, but more importantly than anything, that strategic move that the party really wanted to do and flip the Texas House. And when the scoreboard came up at the end of the day, in those 3 big columns, it was 0, 0, 0. Democrats didn't lose ground, but they didn't gain ground either in those 3.
Yeah, I believe that anytime you think you're in a perfect situation and there's no room for improvement, then there's no room for growth. And so obviously some of the modeling we'll have to take a look at. I think, we may have even underestimated the impact of where some of the current president's views are. I think we may have thought that we were much further along in terms of uniting around what we believe will be progress for not only the state of Texas, but for the nation. In terms of engagement, I am one that I say that we have to engage all populations in and out of season. So you'll see even more of that, where you'll see an increase in engagement across the board. And then, you cannot deny the impact that COVID-19 potentially had on having boots on the ground. That is always a winning method. Door knocking, you just...
Should the party
block walking? You can't negate that.
Right. Well, should Democrats have donned masks and gone to knock on doors?
Well, one could argue that, but I think the perspective of, if you looked at it closely, even in the as we really got into GOTV, you did see some door knocking, some block walking.
Right. But
the reality is, we really were taking high precaution of safety and security. And at the end of the day, that matters most.
Right.
Did we want to lose an election based on that? Absolutely not. But the reality is, I do think that we're still, as you know, we're still in a very hot spot in terms of being affected by COVID-19. So that's an indicator you can't deny.
Yeah, and no question about the virus here too. And just for our viewers, GOTV, get out the vote. That's something that both parties use. Here, let me ask you this last question here, Dr. Braley. Every 4 years, Democrats are getting more and more votes in the presidential election. 4 years ago, President Trump won this state by 9 points. This year, the president won by 6 points. We have seen that lead diminish and diminish. But by that math, though, we're still looking at, 8 to 12 years before Texas Democrats might turn this state blue.
Yes, but the reality is, for so long on a Democrat side, Texas was a state that exported dollars. And so what you've seen for the first time in many years is that we were importing donors. Something that matters in terms of really having the resources. The reality is, Texas is a huge state. It's like 5 states in one. And it's not a monolithic state. Mm-hmm. So you have to find ways that you win this state.
Dr. Braley, I appreciate your time as always. Thanks so much.
Oh, thank you.
Believe it or not, we are now 65 days away, 2 months now, until the Texas legislature reconvenes. And in the week since we last saw you, more state lawmakers say they are now going to run for Speaker of the House. The House of Representatives elects a leader each session, and the last speaker, Dennis Bonnen from Brazoria County, south of Houston, he decided not to run again after members of his own party turned against him. So the race is on to replace him. Ross Ramsey is keeping track of who is and who is not running. Ross, of course, the co-founder and executive editor of the Texas Tribune. Good morning to you, Ross.
Good morning, Jason. How are you?
You're doing well here. Almost a half dozen Democrats said they were going to run for Speaker before the election happened. Who do you think might have a shot at a consensus? I don't see how a Democrat would be elected since they didn't gain majority control.
Well, this collapsed pretty quickly on election night. When the Democrats didn't win a majority, in fact, they didn't even gain a seat in the Texas House. The Democrats who were running for Speaker all quietly went back into their caves. So it looks like Dade Phelan, who is a Republican from Beaumont, is going to be the Speaker unless something extraordinary happens. He has well over 100 votes from Democrats and from Republicans, and looks like he's on the way to replace Dennis Bonnen. It was a very, very quick race, but the voters decided a lot of it just by removing half the candidates.
Yeah, indeed so. Let's talk about the next session. We've seen pictures of plexiglass there on the House floor and in the Senate as well, too. Considering COVID, it might be spiking in a lot of parts of the state. How likely is it that they'll actually return to the legislature, that lawmakers will return to Austin?
I think they'll return. The question is, how are they going to return? Do they let the public in? The Senate is only 31 members, and they're in a big room, and you could feasibly socially distance in that room, at least for sessions. The House, if you've ever been in there, is like a fire ant mound. There's 150 members, there's 50 staffers in there. And the question is, can they find a place to meet that's safe and that also allows some public interaction? And do they meet for the full 140 days?
Ross, always appreciate your color. Back to you in a moment, man. Coming up, Texas remains red, but it is now competitive as well. We'll talk to a Republican and Democrat about lessons learned from last Tuesday and what you should expect to see in 2022 and 2024. Plus, we said all year the coronavirus would be an issue in the election. Did that hurt Texas Democrats? There's one thing Republicans say the Dems should have done. You're watching Inside Texas Politics. The autopsy on election results in Texas. That is the topic of our latest political podcast. And we're letting you listen in an on-the-record phone call, a conference call with Dave Carney. Dave's the chief political strategist for Governor Greg Abbott. Carney telling reporters what he thinks Texas Republicans did right and what they're going to have to do differently now with Democrats. If your mobile phone is handy, you can listen to this podcast this morning here. Just open your camera, aim it at the QR code there on the right side of your screen. It will take you directly to this episode of Y'all-itics. Remember, new episodes drop every Tuesday. Texas Republicans are gloating right now. They escaped intact after last week's election, but Democrats did make some progress. We're talking about the long game here. With us right now, a Republican and a Democrat to talk about the future of Texas politics. Deborah Peoples, the chairwoman of the Democrats in Tarrant County, and Vinny Manchillo, a principal at Glasshouse Strategies here in Dallas, an ad firm that makes commercials for Republican candidates. It's great to see you guys again. We appreciate you being here.
Well, it's great to see you and Vinny.
Exactly. Deborah, let me start with you. You guys as Democrats have had a few days to digest the results. Why didn't Democrats flip the Texas House, win majority control there, flip the state of Texas, or even defeat John Cornyn like Democrats said they were going to do for months?
So, Jason, I think we know, and you're right, we've had a few days to digest this. And so I believe that we didn't do a good job of judging the mood of the people. And unfortunately, people listen to polls. I've been saying all along, you don't listen to polls. You have to get out and knock on doors and talk to people. And so I think Democrats got a little complacent looking at the polls. And we now know we have a lot more work to do. We also lost it in the rural areas. We did a great job in the big cities. Look at Tarrant County. I mean, Biden is going to carry Tarrant County. We didn't do a good job with the down ballot. And so I think, COVID kind of altered some of our plans to get out and knock on doors. But what got us the wins, or is getting us the wins in many places, is direct contact with the voters. And we know we've got to do a better job of that. Let
me ask Vinny about that. Vinny, I mean, clearly, Deborah's laying out things they should have done differently. The virus is something no one could predict. But at the end of the day, Democrats registered a heck of a lot of people. Democrats brought in a lot of money to the state. And my guess is that's likely going to mean stronger candidates in the future to run against Republicans.
Well, that's the exact problem. I think that, this time Texas Democrats, they've kind of blown their best chance in a generation. They had $20 million come in for redistricting, money that's not coming back in 2022. And I think the slate of candidates they put up was too far left of the voters. And that's a real problem. And Elizabeth Beck is probably a great candidate in Oregon, but she's no amount of money is going to get her over the line in Tarrant County. Just a bad fit.
Yeah.
Go
ahead, Deborah.
Vinny, I disagree with that. I think what Democrats did is we're way too nice. And you do messaging. I think we let Republicans control this message. This whole thing about defund the police and we're way too liberal. We didn't clap back. As my 20-year-old something says, you clap back when people say stuff. I think we assumed that people would understand these issues and understand that defund the police didn't mean take away all the police. And I just think we missed an opportunity that we let Republicans get away with that message.
Deborah, here's the thing, though. Democrats never clap back at Republicans.
You're right.
Republicans have messaging now.
And Jason, that's it. And so, Vinny, I'm just going to tell you, here in Tarrant County, I'm not known for holding my tongue. I know many times I'm battling the whole state party because people are saying, no, you can't do this. And that my thing is, we have to clap back, because I will tell you, the Republican ads were fierce and they were coming at us every day, and they had a consistent message.
Let's talk about, Vinny, go ahead. I mean, how do you respond to that? Clearly, Republicans are better on messaging.
Deborah must have been watching another election than I was. I mean, we saw millions of dollars of races, from Lorenzo Sanchez going negative on a race. More money than we've ever seen running negative ads from the Democrat side. So there was more than clapping back. It was time in the woodshed. So there was plenty of stuff from their side.
Vinny, looking forward, I want to ask both of you guys this question, but looking forward, Vinny, what changes next cycle, 2022 and 2024, based on what we just saw? What changes?
Yep. The math. I think there's a lot of people looking at flawed math. The Beto math is gone. I think MJ Hagar is totally out of the picture now. I think her career is over.
Right.
I think how we approach everything in a Trump-less world is going to change. So, in a lot of ways, both parties are at ground zero from a math point of view. It's going to be a big difference.
And Deborah, same question for you. 60 seconds left here. What changes moving forward here in the next two cycles?
So I think Vinny is absolutely right. It is not going to be a Trumpless world. And, so much of what we did, or the campaign for 2020, was based on Trump. We've now got to go back and figure out, how do we get back to grassroots politics? I mean, I think, we were fighting at the top, and I think you'll see Vice President Biden's numbers are going to continue to grow in Tarrant County. Vice President Biden's going to win Tarrant County. What we got to do is figure out, how do we get down to the bottom? How do we elect an Elizabeth Beck? How do we elect Democrats down at the bottom? And that's getting different messaging and getting out there.
Vinny, final word, because she got the better of you, even though they don't clap back. She got the better of you in this interview, man.
No, never.
No, I think the thing we've got to remember is it always comes down to candidates.
Yeah.
You've got to have quality candidates that people can vote for. It all starts there.
All right. Guys, thanks so much. Deborah Peoples and Vinny Manchillo, good to see you guys again. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. One thing overlooked in the election is the coronavirus, as we just discussed here a moment ago. Now some say it wound up hurting Texas Democrats. We're going to explain that next on the Roundtable.
This is Inside Texas Politics with Jason Whiteley.
Time now for Reporters Roundtable to put the headlines in perspective. Ross is back with us, Bud Kennedy from the Fort Worth Star-Telegram is here, and of course Bernadine Steptoe, the political producer at WFAA in Dallas, joins us for this segment each week. And Ross, will start with you. We've had a few days to digest what happened in last Tuesday's election. What does it say about the state of Texas right now, do you think?
I think the Texas voters elected to stay the course. They stuck with everybody they had. They made no changes party-wise in the congressional delegation. One change in the Texas Senate, a Republican lost a seat in very Democratic territory, and no changes in the public house. They like the way things are going in Texas, it looks like.
Bud, the question for you, where did Democrats go wrong?
Well, Democrats, I think the biggest mistake they made was that they treated COVID like it made them stay home and ran their campaigns like some sort of remote video game. When you finally saw Democrats at the very end go out and campaign door to door, they were in these outfits, they looked like they were beekeepers. The only Democrat that went out door to door and campaigned, Ruby Woolridge in Arlington broke from the rest of the party. And she sent me a text message when she did. She said, they're all saying not to go out door to door, but I got to do it. She went out. She was running for city council in Arlington, but a giant race. She won by a narrow margin.
Bernadine, would that really have made a difference, do you think, if they did the traditional, door knocking and talking to voters, interacting?
But I think it would have helped, because I don't think anyone can dispute the fact that when you talk to people face to face, it helps. But I also think that Democrats must find a way to carve off some of that rural vote. That's where they're getting just demolished. Yeah. They must be able to communicate and message and get some of that rural vote, because the Republicans are getting almost all of it, especially up in West Texas, Montgomery County, Potter County in West Texas. But I think that's what the Democrats must do.
Bud?
Well, I was just going to say that rural vote. Go ahead.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Bud. Go ahead.
I was going to say that rural vote was, got sunk when Joe Biden talked about downplaying oil. I think that's what really turned out the rural vote, along with the last weekend when Trump had the big rallies, stirred up the spirit. Bernadine, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, that could be part of it, but they were going out for President Trump as well. And also, now I'm not going to just say Democrats, because the Republicans must find a way to sort of carve off some of those big cities.
Well, that's what I wanted to ask you, Ross, because everyone's in their corners. The Democrats love the urban areas, the Republicans love the rural areas. And they both, to survive, don't they both need to, I don't want to say swap places, but at least get inside each other's territory?
You've got to be competitive with the voters in the middle. There aren't any voters in the middle, which means you've got to be competitive for voters on the other side. You've got to reach out to them, figure out what they want. It's a hand-to-hand combat game. I think the door-to-door stuff really hurt the Democrats. But, you look around the country and this just was not their year.
And Bud, can we really say Texas is still a red state?
I think Texas is just a little more, hint of purple, just because the gap in the presidential race was 6 points this year instead of 9 points. It's a little closer. There's a couple of more Democrats here and there. Tarrant County voted for Biden, the third largest county in the state. There's a little more purple.
And Bernadine, what do you think?
I think it's a little bit more purple, but as we said earlier, they're going to have to get out of their comfort zones, both parties, because Texas is becoming more, is growing, it's becoming more diverse, and you can't stay in one area of Texas and survive.
All right, guys, a lot more analysis to be done on this election, no doubt. I'm sure political scientists will be looking at it too, but thank you guys very much for your time this morning. We appreciate that. Thank you for watching as well. We're back next Sunday with another episode of Inside Texas Politics. Have a good day.